The Indian luxury market is the second fastest growing in the Asia-Pacific region and touted to touch the $30 billion mark in the next few years. To talk more on this and on the opportunities and challenges in the Indian luxury market, we have with us here Sanjay Kapoor, the Managing Director of Genesis Colors. So one of the questions asked to you at your session was about the entry of luxury brands in small town India, and you spoke about how you would rather open a third store in Bombay, Bangalore or Chennai rather than a store in Ludhiana. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, the way I said it was, if you look at it, if you see the McKinsey report and you just go by general understanding, Delhi and Bombay constitutes anywhere from 45 to 50% of the wealth. So luxury today exists in Delhi, Bombay for sure, and has gone on to Bangalore, Hyderabad, soon Chennai, and Calcutta would be a natural extension. Now, does luxury and can luxury work in Ludhiana and Coimbatore? I'm not saying it does not have consumers. It's just that there's a small segment of consumers, and either a series of brands went in there, created the infrastructure and the ambiance to shop, or there's so much money in Delhi and Bombay that you'd rather open a second and a third store there, understand that market, saturate that market before going to another market. I mean, there's this misconcept about, oh, Ludhiana sells more Mercedes than Delhi, but it doesn't. It doesn't sell in absolute numbers.
Right.
Okay, I mean, in absolute numbers, you cannot compare the wealth that one has in Delhi and Bombay.
But some brands are trying to break that mold. So, for example, the Hermes store, the first one opened in Pune, ahead of Bombay. How would you explain that? Do you think it's a way to test the market?
I think to each their own. Delhi has the first Hermes store.
Right.
Bombay is opening a store, what I understand, and maybe it could be that they've opened their store there because their partner owns the hotel. So sometimes relationships are different.
There are different factors at work.
Correct.
Okay. And so how do you think luxury brands would need to innovate to appeal to the small town consumer? Is he or she very different from the consumer in a metro? Do they prefer bigger, more visible branding? Is there a different kind of luxury product that appeals to the consumer, say, in Pune than in Bombay?
Well, if you just understand basic luxury, it would mean the cities that are more exposed to luxury would have a more sophisticated buyer, right? So when you have a first-time buyer buying luxury, and in every small city, there would be very sophisticated customers, in any case, buying them in Delhi, Bombay, or traveling overseas. But when newer markets open up, it would be entry price points may change slightly, but I don't think the Indian consumer is very different across the country. There are different sensibilities, there are different festivals. North India has Karwa Chauth, East India has Durga Puja, South India Onam, different times may be there. But I think by and large the Indian consumer is fairly standard except seasons. You know, there's only seasons in North India. The rest of India has one season. Or maybe two seasons if you take monsoons, hot and rains.
But so more broadly, as someone who's bringing in a wide variety of brands into India, including something like Bottega, which is quite known for its very subtle branding. It's weave rather than a more flashy logo. Do you find Indian consumers across the country, how are they reacting? Are they sophisticated enough to react to these more subtle brands in the same way that they would to, say, a monogrammed
Absolutely.
bag?
Like I said, I think Indians are one of the most sophisticated customers. You're right, we've brought in Bottega. In fact, we're opening our fourth store right now in a couple of months, and a fifth store possibly by the end of the year. People do understand the brand. There is a lot of brand awareness about it. There is obviously the finer lot that has been consuming this for years. And I think Indians scale up very easy. Okay, so absorption of new brands, what works, what doesn't work, is a very rapid transformation for our country. I mean, the women in India, for example, are super sophisticated. They dress up in their beautiful finery of Indian clothes with Jimmy Choo shoes and Vuitton bags or whatever it is. And there's a nice, healthy mix and match that goes on. So we, if you compare with the Chinese consumer, we're definitely more sophisticated.
In terms of the sort of innate
I think it's just our culture.
Our
culture has, inherently India has been the land of Maharaja, silverware, finer arts, beautiful carpets. I think some of that just runs in our blood.
Right. So one of the very important points discussed in the session, which was basically opportunities and challenges, you mentioned infrastructure as one of the sort of biggest challenge. I believe the other ones were lack of real estate, taxation and duties, and adapting to local taste. So tell us why you believe infrastructure is the biggest challenge, and what is being done to change that.
Well, actually, infrastructure is real estate. That's what I meant.
Okay.
The infrastructure, the lack of availability of the right real estate is, in my opinion, one of the larger challenges. Duty rates have gone down in the past, and they're going to continue to go down. So the natural phenomenon, I don't think that's something we need to be overly worried about. I mean, India will follow a progressive route of bringing down duties. But infrastructure takes a longer gestation period. Brands can only exist in the right environment, in the right ambience.
So
and
like
we need to build that.
The niche in the malls, for example, that
Correct.
you were talking about.
You need to build that infrastructure. You need to have foresight. So mall owners need to work hand in glove with brand owners to develop that. I mean, if you look at it, it could even build up a fair amount of tourism into India. We've got so much natural beauty, but when people are traveling, apart from natural beauty, you also want to shop. So I think it is a longer term gestation to build the infrastructure. If you go to China, for example, whether it's the highways or the airports or the roads or the malls, they've developed them phenomenally.
So it's easier for a luxury brand
Absolutely.
to just snoop down. So you believe taxation and duties are not necessarily the sort of biggest impediment right now?
That can
going
be
down
overcome
further?
because, like I mentioned in my talk also, Indians are price sensitive. And to achieve a pricing, you can take a hit on your margins. Brands can subsidize the product a bit. It's not an unsurmountable challenge. Thought through, it can be overcome. But the right infrastructure, the right ambience is something which takes a longer gestation period, right? So the cost of land is so expensive in India, which creates high rentals.
Right.
Okay, so our productivity in sales are not per se so bad, right? But when you take the high rentals, our productivity may not be that of a Singapore or Dubai, but our rentals are. That is a challenge.
So yes, the price-sensitive Indian consumer. How do you believe that just education about the sort of heritage and the provenance of the brand is enough to wean the Indian consumer away from that price-sensitive way of thinking, or what else needs to be done?
I think educating the consumer is an ongoing, constant process. Educating a consumer on the brand's attributes, what the brand stands for, its heritage, its significance is an ongoing process. That does not necessarily change people's minds on prices. Okay, it's also a question of there is a disparity of prices all across the world. Many people think Singapore and Hong Kong are probably the cheapest places to shop, which is not true.
Okay.
In many cases, they are more expensive than Europe. Most cases, they are expensive than Europe. In many cases, India is cheaper than some of these cities, depending on product to product.
For luxury brands.
For luxury. So it's an ongoing process of educating the consumer and people who buy for today rather than hoard and buy for the whole year. Not everybody shops when they travel. So it's an ongoing process. Also, the price differential is never going to change as long as there are duties. I mean, for example, look at China. Even today, there's 18% duty in China. China is definitely more expensive than Hong Kong.
What's the duty in India?
Between 20 and 40%, depending on the products. Like I said, that is something which is going to change over time. It gets lower and lower every year.
What do you see it? Any predictions for what it's going to be, say, 5 years hence?
I'm not the government, so I can't predict. But I'm sure it'll be at least half of what it is right now from 5 years from now.
Okay. So coming back to sort of small town India and expanding into, which do you think, beyond these 5 cities that, that were largely mentioned today, so, of course, there's Bombay, Delhi, there's Bangalore, and now Hyderabad and Chennai. Which are the new cities that luxury brands will be looking at next?
We're looking at Calcutta fairly seriously. Again, it is a question not of the market, but also the right infrastructure.
Okay. So you need the correct malls.
You need the correct environment. You need a large enough base. You can't be the only store out there.
Okay.
So next on our list would be Calcutta.
Okay. And what else? What after
that?
I
think we'd develop further in Delhi and Bombay. If I would take a 3-year strategy, if I take a 5-year strategy, we'd look at Ludhiana too. Ludhiana and Chandigarh.
What are the factors that make you decide what brands you will bring into India? What is the research that goes into what you think will work for the Indian luxury consumer or not?
So we've concentrated primarily on men's clothing and women's accessories.
Okay. And why these two? These were...
Well, women's accessories is an easy thing because women's clothing, there's a lot of competition from Indianist type clothing, right? So you still have the great Indian wedding still have women in beautiful saris and beautiful Indian clothes wearing a fancy handbag and fancy shoes. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. And men's is actually a bigger market than women's in India, right? So There is a market for the Kenalis and the Etros and the Paul Smiths, for the well-discerning, well-traveled Indian customer.
Right.
That's one part of it. I think the other part of it is also working with brands that are willing to put in a commitment that India is a long-term business. Because brands need to support this business.
So you would work with those brands that are interested in India long term.
That are willing to make the commitment in advertising, marketing, building the business together. It's not a very simple, I mean, we work with brands as our partners, whether a joint venture or franchisee, they need to invest in the business too. And that'll only happen if they believe in the market and they want to come into India, willing to invest also.
Right. So, and any plans in the next few years to expand into other categories, so apart from men's clothing and women's accessories?
It will be a natural extension. We will continually expand with brands and new categories too.
Okay, but is there a particular category that you're looking at after this?
You know, we're looking at all categories. The watch and jewelry market, for example, is very interesting. But having said that, duties are more challenging in the watch and jewelry market because it's easier for having a parallel economy in there. Beauty is another great market that can be expanded, and in any case, the fashion accessory business will continue to grow.
So jewelry was mentioned in a couple of sessions today as in India it's 30% of the Indian luxury consumption as opposed to 9% of the global luxury consumption. So is that an area that
Well, traditionally in India, jewelry is also considered a safe investment, right?
So you don't think luxury brands would
well, it's different. I don't. There's going to be a very limited market for a Cartier or Tiffany jewelry right now when you have great Indian jewelers producing handcrafted, very fine gems and jewelry. But the entire market, let's say watches also, that's a huge market.
Okay, but are you involved with any jewelry brands?
Not
bringing
yet.
Down? Okay, and is that something you'd look at in the long term? Or?
Like I said, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yet is a critical word out here.
So especially when we talk of say jewelry and watches, and we spoke about bags earlier, counterfeit products become a very important point in the discussion. Is that something that's big enough for you to be dealing with in India?
Honestly, I'm not so worried about the counterfeit market. We do have very strong trademark and patent laws.
Right.
Implementing the laws is another story, is very difficult. You don't see in India, a person traveling to China or Hong Kong. You have people in the evening, they open their white sacks and they're taking out these bags in the pavement. You don't see that in India. You see that even in Rome and Milan, for example. I think the government's done a great job on its trademark laws. It would help if implementation of the laws would become easier. Currently, maybe the market is not big enough to be a source of threat for the counterfeit. You never know, it may change in the future.
But you're not worried about what that does for the brand's image or identity?
Imitation is the best form of flattery. I know Coco Chanel said that many years ago.
Okay.
Yes, it does affect your sales, but if you're building the market, right, people will copy you, but they can't copy your innovation. So you always have to be one step ahead of the market.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.